I first saw the Zhongyin building from the taxi window at dusk, after a rain that had glazed Fujian's streets into ribbons of smeared neon. It rose from the block like a sugared blister, bubblegum-pink, 12 stories of glossy optimism, the color of a cartoon heart pasted onto a city of glass and brushed steel. If it had been any other color, I might have looked past it. Shenzhen has a way of swallowing shapes, smoothing everything into speed. But the pink held my eyes like a bruise, and in it I saw my reflection distort, soften, then vanish. Zhongyin, my driver said, following my gaze. He rolled the word around as if deciding how to pronounce it. Some people say it means China silver. Others make a different joke. They say it sounds like between, the in-between place. He laughed briefly, then glanced at the meter and stopped. I was there to film a quick piece for a property firm that sometimes hired me to make dying listings look alive. Slow pans of empty lobbies, neat shots of corridors with depth, elevators that opened on cue, a few well-timed rack focuses to suggest a story a tenant might imagine themselves into. The email had read, breezy and bold, "We're rebooting the brand. Feng shui refreshed. New koi pond coming. Can you capture the feel?" They offered triple my usual rate. My rent was due. A security guard in a Navy uniform was dozing at a laminate desk when I entered. The lobby smelled like wet plaster and citrus cleaner, and the light, those two white LEDs that make pores into pockmarks, buzzed with a thin, constant whine. On the wall beside the empty concierge window, someone had hung a tank of wavering goldfish above a basin lined with faux river stones. A skewed octagonal mirror faced the door, its wooden frame scored with scratches. A money cat on the counter twitched its paw with dying battery stubbornness. "Filming," I said in Mandarin, holding up the email on my phone. "I'm expected." He took my ID without looking at my face, stamped the visitor registry with a wet red seal, and returned it. The date and time bled outward, blushing the paper. When I asked about the building's occupancy, he shrugged. "People come, people go." His eyes slid toward the koi. They always need feeding. I rode the elevator alone to the 8th floor. The car's walls were polished steel. My face stretched into a downward smear. The light strip above the door flickered once, quick as a blink, and in that flicker I felt, more than saw, someone else standing just behind my shoulder, the brush of a sleeve, the faint smell of iron and damp cloth. When the doors opened with a sigh, the corridor beyond yawned empty, a long throat with doors on each side and green fire escape signs humming in the same pitch as the lobby lights. Zhongyin's corridors wore their ghost rep like stage makeup. Yellow talismans with red ink had been pinned over door frames, some new and crisp, some old enough to curl at the corners. Little peachwood swords no longer than chopsticks were taped above vents. Every other door bore a round bubble mirror that reflected the blankness across from it into fishish eye. At the far end hung a faded print of a stern war god, his righteous glare aimed at anyone walking toward him, as if daring them to try their luck. My client wanted shots of the freshened feng shui, so I set my tripod mid-hall and began. The camera's hum soothed me. The world narrowed to aperture and focus. In my headphones, the corridor breathed. Air conditioning units shivered as if they had fevers. Somewhere, a loose sign tapped gently against a wall. Subtle, steady, almost a lullaby. Then the tapping stopped. There was a long exhale of silence, so complete I could hear the building's skin, a faint tick as the day's heat withdrew from the walls. I waited. Nothing. When I panned left, a shadow slipped along the skirting board, darker than the gloom and the wrong shape for a person, too flat, too thin, like a brushstroke that had fallen off a painting and learned to crawl. I froze. The viewfinder glowed against my eye. The shadow was gone. Farther down the hall, a row of lights fluttered and steadied. It's an old building, I told myself. Settling. I worked my way toward the end of the corridor, under the unblinking gaze of the war god's print. The restroom door stood ajar. Inside, someone had arranged a little shrine atop the paper towel dispenser, a chipped ceramic cup half filled with rice, 3 incense sticks burned to knuckles, a single tangerine mummified into a wrinkled fist. On the mirror, a hand-painted poster in big black strokes shouted slogans from another decade. Over it, taped in office font, a printout pleaded, "Please refrain from political decorations." As I backed away, my shoulder brushed the poster and it kissed my neck. The paper was cold and faintly damp. I wiped the spot with my sleeve and felt gooseflesh lift. The firm wanted a shot of the new co-working suite on 8. The door was unlocked. Inside, the room was staged without conviction. Particle board desks with potted succulents, a whiteboard wiped mostly clean but still fogged with the specter of a mind map, arrows, and circled words. The south windows gave an impressive view of the city's pulse. Elevated roads, ribbons of lights, construction cranes like iron herons at rest. In the glass, my reflection drifted, faint against it all. Behind me, a chair moved. It was a small sound, a felt foot dragging. I spun. All the chairs were where I left them, tucked politely under their desks. But in my headphones, I caught a whisper of fabric, a sigh one makes when sitting after standing too long. I leaned into the viewfinder again, foolishly as if a lens could better see touch. The camera showed me the room I was in, and something else layered beneath it. Not co-working desks, but rows of crude benches. Not a whiteboard, but a wall pocked by old nails. Above it all, a single naked bulb that swayed slightly, though there was no breeze. In the headphones, a voice began to speak. Not to me. Not modern speech. The cadence was an old one I had heard from my grandmother when she recited prayers at New Year, a rhythm that rode the back of her tobacco cough. Others joined, higher, lower, the chorus of a crowd learning to speak with one throat. I couldn't make out the words, but their beat was a tide pulling the room out from under me. I ripped the headphones off. The chant continued, muffled now by air and the dumb interiors of the walls. I decided to shoot the lobby coy and be done. I did not need the extra money as much as I needed my sleep. When I stepped back into the corridor, all the yellow talismans lifted at their bottom edges as if a wind had slunk through, though the air was still. They fluttered not up and down, but toward the end of the corridor where a fire door stood closed. For a moment they looked like red tongues tasting for rain. The elevator arrived the instant I pressed the button, so promptly I didn't see it travel. The doors slid apart. The car was empty, lights steady. I stepped inside and pressed L. The doors closed. The car did not move. The floor display above the doors blinked a symbol that wasn't a number, a shape I couldn't see but somehow knew, a word that meant shadow, the in-between. The door remained shut, the car humming with the contented purr of an animal. My phone pinged a notification with no signal. My reflection in the steel opposite shifted. My clothes were wrong. My shirt had become coarse weave, collar frayed. A red armband hugged my left sleeve. I tasted ash. No, I said to a god I didn't believe in, and jabbed the open button. The doors obeyed. The corridor beyond was no longer the corridor. Or rather, it had become another version of itself. The wall paint chalky, scabbed with old tape and slogans. The floor tile cracked and dirty, scuffed in frantic arcs. Paper posters bloomed and overlapped like scales. Big characters in black strokes shouting across one another. Names circled, accusations pinned like butterflies. I recognized one name, my surname. My grandfather's given name followed. Across it, someone had drawn a thick black X. I stepped backward. The elevator closed me in again. In the steel, a figure stood behind me, perfectly still. He was taller than me, thin as a post, eyes like sickle moons that did not blink. His mouth did not fully close. When he spoke, the whisper brushed my neck like the poster had. "Witness," he said in a dialect not mine. "Count." "Count what?" My voice squeaked. "I'm not proud of it. Debts." The word lengthened, tasting of rust. Debts. He wasn't a person. He was the idea of a person that had survived being erased. A residue of intention and rage and the desire to tally wrongs and rights until the ledger of one matched the other. In the headphones dangling from my neck, the chant swelled again, and the LEDs buzzed harmonic to it. "You can leave," the security guard had said without saying it. "People come, people go." But his eyes had drifted to the koi, creatures that circled forever in a box too small for seasons. They always need feeding. The elevator lurched. The display switched to 8, then 7, then 6, then 5, skipping 4 the way some buildings do, as if superstition could make an unlucky floor not exist. It stopped between 5 and 3. The display settled on that same shadow word I couldn't see and yet understood. The doors opened onto a space that could not be a floor because no one would build a floor there. Low ceiling, raw concrete, a liminal slice left for pipes and cables. It smelled like dust and something sweet gone bad. They were all there. The people who never left. No, not people. impressions. Pressed into the space like the negatives of old photographs. Men, women, a child clutching the hem of a coat. They were the residue of words shouted over other words. What remains when an accusation outlives the accuser, when apologies are forbidden and memory curdles into rumor. At the center of the knot floor sat a ledger on a collapsible metal table. Its pages were grayed with handling, the corners softened into suede. I knew, without opening it, that it contained names. I also knew, without being told, that someone had to read them aloud to keep the Zhongyin between floors from collapsing. Someone had to count the debts, weigh them like wet laundry, and hang them in air until they dried into nothing. The building wasn't haunted the way urban explorers mean. The building was the haunting, a machine for prolonging the in-between. Developers had festooned it with charms not to chase away ghosts but to hold them, to bind them into an asset that could be managed. The tall knot man stepped around me, his feet making no sound, his shadow arriving ahead of him like a stain. "Name," he said. "Rid. I don't owe you." I said it like a child says I didn't break the plate. But my eyes rested finally on my grandfather's name inked on those old posters in the corridor, on the black X crossing him out, and my stomach turned. Family stories came back, the ones we pretended were jokes. How grandfather escaped south, came back with a different surname. How my grandmother never explained the tattooed number beneath her left elbow that she said was from a clinic but looked too much like a registry. The ledger was very close now. I didn't remember moving toward it. I put my hand on its cover. The material was neither paper nor skin, but both. It was warm. Somewhere below, the koi banged their mouths against the surface of their little world, opening and closing with appetite. In my headphones, the chant hiccuped and faltered. I realized the impressions in the knot floor were waiting for me to start, the way an orchestra waits for the baton to rise. My grandmother's voice, my real grandmother, rose with my heart's click. She had taught me a simple prayer when I was little, for bad dreams and lost paths. I heard it now the way I heard it then, mumbled bedside under the stale perfume of ointment and smoke. Return, return, return. I touched the jade pendant at my chest. I had worn it for years without thinking. The stone was cool against my thumb, slick with skin oil. I breathed in formaldehyde light and old ink and the faint garden smell of tangerine peel. I breathed out the first word of the prayer, so quiet I wasn't sure I had said it. The knot man inclined his head. I spoke again, louder, and the LEDs flared, dimmed, then found a new hum. The ledger opened itself. The pages were handwritten in careful black strokes, the kind taught when calligraphy and morality were the same lesson. The names were not only of the dead, they were the living, too, lawyers and property managers and tenants whose rent was late, a boy who kicked a koi pond and laughed. I saw my own name. The letters were too neat. I did not like how the lower line of my given name had been extended, as if to trip me when I walked. The knot man pointed at the first line. "Witness," he said again, stern but not unkind. "A bailiff, tired of everyone. Count," I counted. My voice echoed in that impossible space, bouncing off ducks and the soft bodies of shadows. As I spoke, figures lifted like moths from the page and drifted toward the walls, where they hovered, patient, as if waiting for their names to be completed and their balances tallied. The ledger grew heavier. I kept reading. My grandmother's prayer braided around the names, a thin thread. My heart rate slowed. With a quiet horror more intimate than any jump scare, I realized that if I finished the page, if I finished the book, I would not be allowed to go. Someone must always be here to tie off the day's accounts, to leave the next reader a place to begin. The Zhongyin building would keep me the way aquariums keep koi. I closed the ledger. The sound it made was a soft thump with an echo in it. The knot man's head snapped up. He was suddenly very close, his knot breath cold. "Unfinished," he said. It was not a threat. It was a fact, like the sun will go down or water seeks its level. "Then let it be unfinished," I said, and lifted the ledger. It weighed as much as a guilt that wasn't mine, and exactly that. I walked backward into the elevator, eyes never leaving his. He did not follow. The doors did not want to close. The open button lit itself. I pressed close until my thumb hurt. The doors kissed. The car dropped, smooth as if swaddled. In the lobby, the guard was awake. He said nothing when I placed the ledger on his desk. The koi whirled to the surface, expecting a handout. their mouths opened and closed. The octagonal mirror over the door had straightened itself. In its convex reflection, my face was mine, my clothes were mine. There was no red armband, but my eyes looked older. The guard glanced at the ledger, then at me. "Not yours," he said, and slid it toward his belly. "You can go." The street outside was full of scooters, umbrellas, the snap of card games from the dumpling place on the corner. The rain had stopped. Heat rose from the pavement like a blessing and a curse. I walked until the pink building was a flat shape between two other boxes, until I could imagine that if I turned away, it would forget me. At home, I uploaded the footage. In the co-working room pan, a chair moved on its own. In the restroom shot, the poster's ink seemed to creep upward, gathering into a neat brush, then respelling a slogan I refused to translate. In the corridor sweep, the talismans fluttered toward a closed fire door. In the elevator, a 3-second flicker showed my reflection wearing a red armband and smiling with someone else's mouth. I scrubbed through frame by frame. On the audio track, under the noise floor, a voice whispered names. The levels peaked on my surname, then steadied. I exported without color correction. I emailed the property firm. The footage didn't come out as hoped. They didn't reply. A week later, I saw a new listing boasting energetic rebrand, charming color, heritage positive narrative. The photos were airbrushed of bruises. The koi were the brightest gold I have ever seen. Sometimes when the apartment is very quiet, the elevator in my building hums with a sound that doesn't belong to it. My phone pings with a notification from a number I don't recognize, an auto-generated voice message that is only my own voice speaking a name that is not mine. I unplug my headphones before I listen, but the voice climbs out of the tiny speaker anyway, slick as fish. It says witness, count. On certain nights when sleep makes of me a hallway, I stand before a door that doesn't exist in my floor plan. A round mirror hangs above it, reflecting nothing. The paper talismans flutter inward. The ledger waits on a collapsible table inside a room that exists between the 5th and the 3rd floors of a building the color of candy and old wounds. I hold the jade pendant and imagine it warm. I try to remember my grandmother's prayer. Sometimes the words come and the dream thins, and I wake with my fingers cramped around a nothing that feels like a page. Other times, the words stay away, and I wake to the faintest smell of tangerine on my pillow and the electric hum of LEDs that are not mine. If you ever find yourself at dusk near a bubblegum-pink office block with koi that circle like years, do not stand too long in its reflection. Don't listen for the elevator chime that sounds slightly wrong, pitched a little lower, as if under someone's breath. Do not read the posters in the stairwell, even if you don't understand the words. If a guard with tired eyes tells you to go, he isn't warning you. He's counting the mouths that need feeding. And if you hear your name spoken by a voice that borrows your mouth from inside the walls, do not answer. Names are thin bridges. The Zhongyin waits on the middle step. It doesn't want to take you down. It wants to keep you there, tenderly, indefinitely, between floors. I arrived at the hospital just as the cicadas stopped. The heat had that stretched, humming quality that makes sound feel like a living thing. The building itself seemed to exhale, a long, slow breath that fogged the glass doors as I pushed them open. The sign above the entrance had been stripped of its old name. Only screw holes remained, like puncture wounds in metal. Inside, a single fan turned with a tick and a shiver, stirring the faint scent of iodine, camphor, and something sweeter, like overripe fruit. I was there to collect stories, the kind that cling to the edges of medicine like lint, folk illnesses, cautionary taboos, whispers of things doctors don't write down. The hospital administrator had introduced the assignment in an airy email. We have a wing no one uses anymore. Old files, oral histories from retired staff. Might be of interest. That was all. I said yes because the subject had a name I couldn't shake loose once I read it. Fugui. Some ghosts, the papers said, prefer rooms. Some prefer rivers. Fugui prefers the human body. It curls in the abdomen and whispers to its host between the organs, a pain with a voice. There was a related name too, Gao Huanggui, linked by proximity in the old texts, as if both haunted a single complicated house. No one described their faces. No one had survived to draw them. The custodian met me in the atrium. She wore a gray cardigan over a dress, a bunch of keys hanging like dull fish from her belt. She introduced herself as Auntie Wren and pressed a paper-wrapped bar of soap into my hand, as if I had already asked for it. "You're sleeping in the old physiotherapy wing," she said. "Fewer windows, less draft." "Less draft is good," I said, though I hadn't asked about the wind. She smiled at that, and for a moment I thought her teeth were blackened. It was only the shadow of the fan blade passing over her mouth. The corridor to the wing was tiled in a white that had been scuffed toward beige by 30 years of bad shoes. The air cooled with each step, as though I were walking down a throat. The walls were papered with faded posters, breathing exercises, anatomical drawings of muscles and nerves. On one, someone had written, in an old, slanted hand, "Listen," below a diagram of a torso. The arrow pointed at the lower ribs. "I'll bring you hot water later," Auntie Wren said, unlocking the ward's door, "and tea." The first room was a square with a single hospital bed, a chair, and a metal cabinet dented along the top as if someone had set down a heavy jar too hard. Dust rose when I set my bag on the chair. The smell of old bedding blossomed like a ghost of sleep. "Why is this wing closed?" I asked. "Budget," she said. "Mold. And the patients who were here said they heard voices. You know how it is." "Do you hear them?" I asked too quickly. She shrugged. "Everyone hears something at night." She looked past me to the far wall. "Keep your waist covered. The belly listens best when it's warm." When she left, the door drew shut with a seal. Silence settled with the weight of a blanket. I unpacked my recorder, my notebooks, a dozen typed transcripts I hoped to match to physical files. My room had one window at the end of the hall, milked with old tape where a crack had once been. The light it admitted felt filtered, as if strained through gauze. That first hour passed quietly. I walked the ward, counting doors. Most rooms were empty. One contained a rack of parallel bars with the rubber peeled back and powdered with talc. Another, a stack of folded bedsheets inside a wire cage, a padlock rusted shut. At the end of the corridor, a double door with frosted panes led to the therapy pool. The glass had that greenish tint that makes reflections seem underwater. I pressed my ear to the panel and heard something like distant water. Then I realized it wasn't water. It was the slow, swollen song of a refrigerated unit cycling on, somewhere deeper in the building. The sound swelled and thinned with a rhythm I couldn't place. Breath, I thought. The building is breathing again. When I returned to my room, there was a tray on the cabinet I hadn't noticed before, a thermos of hot water, a chipped mug, a tin of tea leaves. Auntie Wren must have come while I was walking. I didn't hear her. I lifted the lid and inhaled the tea's sharp, medicinal aroma. Something like licorice, something like bitter orange. The cup warmed my palms. I drank and felt the heat unfurl inside me like a small sun. Dusk, as it always does in old hospitals, arrived as if from within the walls. Fluorescent tubes flicked on with such a clean white that they grew grime halos. Night filled the spaces between their strips of light. From a vent, a draft pressed a cold coin to the top of my spine. I lay down on the bed to listen to the building and write what it said. First, ordinary noises. Elevator gears, distant doors, a rolling cart shepherded down some other corridor. Then the smaller sounds found their way in. The scratch of a moth's wing against my window, the pop and gasp of the pipes. Somewhere, a drop falling rhythmically into a metal sink, the sound reaching me as a high, soft ping. When the whisper came, I thought it was my own breath catching. It collected low under my ribs, as if my stomach had been taught a language without my permission. The words were shaped by pressure more than sound. They rose and fell like bubbles surfacing through thick liquid. Here, here. I am here. I sat upright, hand pressed to my abdomen. The whisper stuttered out. All that remained was the aftertaste of the tea and the thudding of my heart. I told myself it was indigestion and laughed, because that is what you do at night when you are alone and you don't want your thoughts to make more of themselves. On the second whisper, a needle of pain threaded through my middle and tugged. Not sharp, not yet. Just a pull, like someone testing a knot they had tied without telling you. I turned on the bedside lamp and wrote, low, ventral. Voice? Pressure? Name itself? I underlined ventral and felt foolish. I pressed the flat of my palm under my navel and felt the warmth gathered there. If there had been a face inside me, it would have been turned toward my hand, as a cat leans into a touch it had been pretending not to want. I slept and dreamt of corridors that bent upon themselves, covered in blue tiles, slick with condensation. A thin thread of red lay along the floor, leading, and when I followed it to a door, the door opened onto a wet, breathing dark, and a voice said, with gentle patience, "Not that way. Not yet." I woke with a pinch under my ribs, as if a child had reached up and tugged from the other side. Morning blurred through the taped window. I was angled wrong in the bed, covers twisted around my waist like a sash. My notebook lay on the floor. A new line had been scrawled there in my own hand, in letters so hurried they almost came apart. Gao Huanggui sits between the heart and the hunger. I didn't remember writing that. I didn't know where I had learned the phrase, but the words rang like a spoon tapped against the inside of a glass, small and bright and inescapable. The records room lay 2 floors down in a wedge-shaped space that used to be a cafeteria. The fitted counters had been removed, leaving scars in the floor where the stations had been bolted down. Boxes were stacked, labeled in a succession of handwriting styles. I found a cluster in the back marked "Complications, Unresolved." On the topmost folder, a paperclip held a slip of notepaper that read, in a tidy rounded hand, "Listen below the navel. Voices do not love stethoscopes." Inside were notes from a dozen patients. Age, occupation, the same complaint, abdominal pain, moving, speaking. The doctor's comments circled through the same exhausted vocabulary. Psychogenic, referred pain, somatic delusion. 2 files were rubber-banded together, flagged with the word fatal. I did not open those yet. I counted the case numbers. If there had been neat chronology, these broke it. They hiccuped forward and back, like a heartbeat missing a beat. Behind me, a door clicked. I turned, expecting Auntie Wren with a fresh thermos, but the room was empty. Sun in the high windows made a glitter of dust. In that powdery light, for a heartbeat, I saw the shape of a torso on the wall, shadow cast by nothing. Then it shifted, as all shadows do when the clouds move, and there was only the wall. When I finally did look at the fatalities, a map sketched itself inside me. A list of organs involved, a timeline of pain. Each description began in the same place. Periumbilical, the note said, a circle drawn in pencil around a drawing of a body. Whispering noted. Voice says I am here. The symptom list's darkened, pain radiates upward. Appetite fails, internal bleeding evidenced by, I shut the file. My hand had drifted to my middle again, a reflex now. The skin there felt flushed. On the way back to the wing, I passed a memorial board near the stairwell. A simple plexiglass frame held photographs of retired staff who had, as the caption put it, gone to rest. There were smiling faces, awkward poses. The 3rd row center held a woman in a gray cardigan with a bunch of keys at her belt. She was younger in the picture, but her mouth was already fixed in that almost smile I had seen. Auntie Wren, the caption read. Long service, physiotherapy wing. The hallway behind me, which had been full of the moody buzz of lights and the squeak of my own shoes, seemed to empty in an instant. The building drew a slow breath in. I stood very still, one finger on the glass over her face, as if I could press out the recognition like a wrinkle in a sheet. Everyone hears something at night, I said, and this time my voice did not sound like mine. It's not so hard, I told myself, to mistake old pictures for living people in a place like this. The brain, faced with vacancy, throws up familiar shapes. It would be stranger if I had never seen her at all. Anyway, the tea she'd brought wasn't a ghost. It had been hot, it had been heavy, and the cup was still chipped. Back in the ward, the thermos was full again. The tea tin had moved 2 inches to the left. I poured and drank because not drinking would be a confession, and I wasn't ready to confess fear to an empty room. The tea tasted darker. The sweetness in it had thickened, as if fruit left in a bowl had gone to syrup. My notebook lay open on the cabinet. I had left it closed. The page showed another line that I did not remember writing. The belly is a house with 2 rooms, one for hunger, one for grief. Fugui sits in the doorway and asks who you're feeding. The second night, the voices began early. I had barely set the cup down when a whisper rose from below my navel and filled the bowl of my pelvis, the way a hand fills a glove. At first, the sound was no more than a breath. Then it shaped itself into syllables, relentless and faint. Here. I am here. I am here. I am here. I am. It quickened with my heartbeat. When I put my fingers to my wrist, the pulse there ticked under my touch as if trying to escape me. "Stop," I said. "Stop it." I pressed my palm flat and hard against my abdomen, as if I could smother a small animal with the heel of my hand. The voice paused, as if surprised by my daring. In the sudden quiet, a new sound skittered along the hall outside, soft, wet, and swift. Footsteps made by bare feet not quite clean. They stopped at my door. I could hear the breath on the other side. It was so close. The handle turned once, twice. I had not locked it. "Not tonight," I murmured. I said it to the door and to the thing under my ribs. When neither answered, I rose, crossed the room, and slid the bolt in place. The metal clicked with a loudness that made my insides flinch. Silence, swollen with meaning, filled the hall, then retreated as the wet footsteps moved away. Down the corridor, the pool room door whispered. Water made a sound like someone speaking underwater. I did not sleep. The ache unfolded in my abdomen like a flower with too many petals. The whisper rose and fell at the edge of hearing, loudest when I held my breath. I watched the window gray slowly toward dawn, as if the building were cooling off after a fever. When I finally slept, it was out of exhaustion that felt like surrender. In my dream, I stood in the therapy pool, water up to my chest. The tiles were cold under my feet. Something pressed against me from within, pushing outward in slow, searching arcs, as if testing the walls for softness. On the water's surface, a thin red thread floated, coiling and uncoiling with my breath. A voice, my own it seemed, but older, said, "Tie it around your waist and shut the door." I woke to find a length of thread on my blanket, scarlet as a cut. It lay coiled, a single hair of it clinging to my shirt. I stared at it a long time. When I picked it up, static lifted the fine hairs on my forearm. The thread weighed almost nothing. And yet, there was a book in the files on folk protections, red thread at the waist to confuse spirits that count, a comb under the pillow to catch their fingers. I looped the thread around my middle and tied it. It bit lightly into my skin. The whisper under my ribs went silent, as if it had put its ear to the door I had made and was listening to me through it. For an hour, perhaps two, peace spread through me like warmth from a hearth. I drank tea and did not think of the memorial board. I read about a patient who had described a crawling cold like a wet cloth being laid over the inside of his stomach. I wrote, "pain like cloth," and was pleased with the phrase. The building's breath became only air through ductwork. When the fan in the atrium ticked, it ticked like a machine. Then the thread tightened. At first I thought I had moved and it had caught, but it tugged again, a deliberate, creeping pull. It wasn't a thread anymore. It was a leash. The knot pressed into my skin like a thumb. No, not a leash, I thought, mind catching up to panic. A line. From me to something that had taken hold of the other end. I stood slowly. The thread had no visible slack. It lay like a thin wound around me. I followed it with my hand to my left side, to the small of my back, and there my fingers found an end that wasn't an end, just a place where the thread disappeared into skin the way a needle disappears into cloth. My breath went thin. "Off," I told it. "Off." A tug answered. The force of it pulled me a step toward the door. The corridor was not empty. It looked empty, of course, but the air had a thickness to it now, the kind of density water has, the kind that makes movement just a little slower than you expect. I could see, in the frosted panes of the pool room doors, the blurred shape of a figure, not because there was someone there necessarily, because the air wanted there to be. "Everyone hears something at night," I said again, but my voice had lost even the pretense of humor. The red thread tightened. It led me down the hall like a line reeled in slow, patient increments. Each tug arrived an instant before a wave of pain lifted and broke under my ribs. At the pool room, the thread drew me close to the glass until my breath clouded it. I wiped the fog away and saw water black with the reflection of the ceiling. The far lights flickered and settled. The doors had no lock, only a bar to push. I pressed it, and the hinges sighed. The smell inside was thick, chlorine, mildew, the metallic sweetness of something that had bled a long time ago and been washed away without truly leaving. "Not that way," said a voice, and for one stunned, foolish second I was relieved to hear Auntie Wren. She stood on the far side of the pool, gray cardigan, keys dim. Water lapped at the tiles with no visible cause, as if the pool were filling with slow breath. "You brought me tea," I said. The The words felt like a password to a door I had already opened. "I brought you hot water," she said. "The tea was here already." I remembered the tin shifting on the cabinet, the cup unevenly chipped. "You're in the picture," I said, and heard what I sounded like, a child reporting a fact to make sense of a rule. "I am," she said. "I was. Look down." The red thread disappeared into the water at my feet. Its color faltered as it sank, then brightened again, a vein down in the dark. I could not see where it ended. The tug came again from below the surface, this time unmistakable in its greed. "Fugui sits in the doorway," she said softly. "It asks who you're feeding. Don't answer." "I didn't," I said. "I won't." "You did," she said, and her smile asked me to forgive myself. "You drank, you listened, you wrote down its name." The tug became a wrench. Pain unfolded inside me with a cleverness that felt almost human. I staggered forward and caught myself with a hand on the rail. The metal was slick. Condensation broke under my palm like sweat. "Gao Huangui holds the house," she said. "It keeps the rooms apart. When it leaves, Fugui takes both hunger and grief. There's no more door." She looked down at my waist. "Tie it tighter." I did. The thread bit deep. The thing under my ribs pressed outward, insistent as a knee. "How do I make it leave?" I asked. My voice came from my throat, but I could feel where it wanted to come from. Lower, through the belly, through the mouth of me that does not speak. Auntie Ren looked at the water. For a moment, her reflection, small and thin, hung whole on the black surface. Then it trembled and broke. "You don't," she said, gentle as a nurse taking a pulse. "You keep the door shut, and you walk away." "I can't walk," I said, and it was true. The tug had become a pull, and now it became something worse, a harvesting. I could feel, with terrifying clarity, my insides being enumerated by a blind, speculative touch. Here it breathed. Here, here. "Then crawl," she said. Her voice was fading like a radio falling out of tune. "Crawl or float. Don't listen when it begs for a name." I looked up in one bright, horrible thought and saw that her eyes were not eyes, not where they should have been. They were dark hollows like emptied cups. In the next instant, she was gone. The pool room went silent, except for the whisper. It rose under my ribs with such intimacy that I flushed at the shame of it. "I am here," it said, and the words were moist against the inside of my skin. "I am here, and I am hungry, and I am yours." I stumbled backward. The thread burned around my waist. I reached for it, but could not find the end. The tug became a lunge, and the pain it brought was bright enough to be light. My knees hit the tile. My mouth filled with the taste of coins. I crawled. If anyone had seen me then, they would have thought drunk or sick. The corridor heaved around me, a belly contracting. The lights blinked, hummed, and dimmed, and I counted the hums to force my breath into a rhythm that was mine and not the building's. When I reached the ward door, I banged my shoulder against it, slid the bolt back, and fell into the room. On the floor, I found the comb I had seen in the folk protections book, lying under the bed like a left-behind idea. I did not remember putting it there, and I did not care. I shoved it under my pillow as if I were finally obeying a bedtime rule I should have known since childhood. The whisper faltered. I tightened the thread again, until my fingertips went numb. The voice lower in me grew frantic, then sullen, then quiet. Between one breath and the next, the pain lowered its pitch and took on the quality of waiting. In the quiet that followed, I heard the building's long exhale. The fan in the atrium ticked like a metronome someone had set to a slower pulse. Far away, water dropped into a sink and counted the seconds the way the elderly count their steps. I lay on my side and listened to my own breath. It did not sound like anyone else's. I closed my eyes, I opened them. I slept. In the morning, the thread was gone. My waist bore a faint mark like a half-healed cut. The comb lay on the pillow, its teeth bent out of true. The tea tin sat squarely in the center of the cabinet, as if ashamed of having moved itself around. I packed my bag without looking at the bed. I left the thermos open so the last of the heat could leave it, and no one would be tricked by warmth into thinking it was still alive. At the memorial board, I did not touch the glass. I read the names in silence, the way you read pain, in order, making sure to see each one so you don't have to see them all together. On the bus away from the hospital, the seats smelled of plastic and lemon cleaner. A child behind me kicked my seat once, then once more, with the bored precision of someone measuring an exact distance. The landscape slid by in bands. Fields, a wall, a billboard advertising vitamins with a painted smile, enormous on a face that could not possibly exist. When the whisper came, it was faint and almost shy. A hand, I thought, pressed to a window pane. A breath fogging glass. It gathered under my ribs and said, as if embarrassed to be so predictable, "I am here." I looked at the aisle, at the dust sown into the bus's carpet down there where no one looks. I put my hand flat against my abdomen and felt my own warmth, my organ house, my rooms. I thought of Auntie Wren and of the pool, and of the way a reflection breaks when you want it most to hold. "No," I said softly, so the child behind me would think I was talking to the air. "Not today." The whisper withdrew like water pulling back from a shore, not far, just enough to prove it could. By night, back in my own apartment, I placed a comb under my pillow and looped a red thread around my waist again because superstition requires repetition. I set my notebook by the bed. I wrote one last line before I turned out the light. The body is a house that remembers all its guests, even the ones it does not invite. I lay down and listened. The radiator ticked like a creature turning pages. Outside, someone laughed, high and thin, and the sound skittered down the brick and into my room. The whisper rose once, pressed its mouth to my skin, and said, almost kindly, "I am here." "And I am not a door," I answered. For a long time we breathed together, tenant and landlord, hunger and hunger's echo. At some hour I cannot name, I slept. I woke with my hand on my belly and the dawn on the wall. The thread left a faint ring on my skin. The comb's teeth were bent 1 degree farther. I do not know what fugui looks like. I do not think I want to. I know only this. When it speaks, it uses your own voice to do it. And when it asks to be fed, it promises that afterward there will be no more hunger, and for a second that sounds like mercy. I tie the thread every night now. I listen to my rooms. I keep the door shut. Some nights are quiet. On others, the whisper reaches a pitch like the sound of a kettle about to boil, and I lie very still and let it spend itself against the closed mouth of me where it waits. If you ever feel a tug at your waist when no one is there, ask yourself whether you are the house or the guest. If you hear a voice under your ribs, do not answer with a name. And if you meet a kind woman who carries keys and smiles as if she has already forgiven you, tell her I am trying to keep the door shut like she taught me. If she smiles again, count your breaths. If the building around you begins to breathe, breathe with it. Do not open the door. And if you cannot help yourself, if you open it anyway, listen for the thread, tie it, crawl if you must, walk away if you can. I took the night watch at the old cram school because it paid extra for irregular hours, and no one else wanted it. The building had been a public elementary school once, a long rectangle of corridors and classrooms that ended in a wing with a shuttered gym and a basement that smelled like wet cardboard. The owner told me the place was being renovated in stages. For now, I was to sit at the reception desk, answer late calls from anxious parents, and do a round every hour to make sure no one had slipped in to vandalize the place. Easy work, I thought. Just me, cheap coffee, and the hum of fluorescent lights. By 10, the rain had started, soft at first and then harder, until every window had its own silver barcode. The power flickered twice. The security monitors blurred and blipped back into focus. In the camera feed, the far corridor looked longer than it ever did in daylight. The floor wax caught reflections like oil. I watched for movement, told myself that the twitching gray shapes were only the rain's reflection. At 11, I made my first round. The classrooms yawned empty, chairs stacked, whiteboards ghosted with smears of marker. Posters of multiplication tables curled away from the walls, their corners bubbled from years of humidity. The air had the stale tang of chalk dust and mop water. I kept my key ring tight in my palm, not from fear, but from habit. Keys are armor when you are alone. The bathrooms were at the end of the north corridor, past a row of lockers that no one used anymore. Someone had propped a mop against the men's door like a spear. I went into the women's first, clean, lights off, no footprints on the wet tile. The farther stall was taped shut with a strip of out-of-order paper. The tape had loosened as if the door had been opened and then smoothed back in place with uncertain hands. When I turned, my flashlight swept the mirrors and I saw it. Not a person, not even a clear shape, just the suggestion of red in a corner that should have been black. a trick of the beam. I looked again and saw only my own face, pale with the fluorescent pallor of late hours. Back at the desk, I told myself to stop letting my brain chew on old stories. Still, the thought came uninvited. Manto. I had read about that legend once, on a bored afternoon, clicking through articles about yokai and schoolyard rumors. A masked spirit in a red cloak, haunting school bathrooms, appearing to people in stalls at night. It asked a question, red paper or blue paper, and either answer meant death. The only way to live, the article said, was to refuse both or ignore the voice altogether. It was a puzzle with no true solution, a test designed to punish the instinct to answer. At midnight, the rain sharpened into sleet that rattled in the vents. My coffee had gone lukewarm. The monitors showed static for a breath and then returned. In one camera, the one that watched the north hall, the far bathroom door, which I was sure I had closed, eased inward. Maybe it was the building settling, I told myself. Old hinges, a draft. But the movement was too smooth to be an accident, like someone's palm had pressed the handle down and held it there just long enough to slip inside. I went anyway, because that is what you do when you are paid to walk toward the thing you want to avoid. I told myself it would be a vagrant, or a student who'd forgotten a book, or no one at all. My footsteps felt too loud in the corridor, swallowed and then echoed back by the slick tile. The nearer I got to the bathrooms, the colder the air became, as if a window had been left cracked open to the night. The mop still leaned against the men's door, its wet strands dripping like hair. The women's door was ajar by the width of a breath. I clicked on my flashlight and stepped in. The lights did not wake. Either the motion sensor was broken or the sensor had learned not to bother. Water ran somewhere, a lazy trickling from the far stall, the one with the out-of-order tape. The tape lay slack now, sticky with damp. I stood still a long moment, listening, the drip, the distant insect hum of a transformer, my own breath turned shallow by the cold. Then I took a step and another, and the stall door shifted on its hinges with a chuff like someone sighing. There was nothing inside. No one crouched on the toilet tank. No footprints. The bowl had a ring of rust near the water line, and the water itself trembled, as if something had just slipped down through the pipes and out of sight. I reached up to tug the ceiling chain for the single, buzzing light the stall had once used. It thwacked against the porcelain wall. When I let go, the chain kept moving for a second or two too long. I should have left. I knew that. I should have backed out, shut the door, taped it again, returned to my desk, and told myself stories only have power if you feed them. Instead, because I hate the idea of fear telling me where to stand, I locked myself in the stall. I sat down fully clothed on the toilet lid to prove something. What, exactly, I could not have said. I listened to the building breathe. The sleet ticked in the vent. The tile pressed the cold through my jeans. Footsteps outside, soft, not cautious exactly, but measured, like someone who knew these floors and had no reason to hurry. They ended at the row of sinks. The old pipes knocked, water sputtered, and the smell of iron grew behind the fragrance of industrial cleaner. "Hello?" I said. "We're closed." The faucet shut. For a moment there was no sound at all. Then from the other side of the thin door, a voice, smooth, almost kind. "Do you need paper?" My throat closed. The instinct is always to answer, to be polite, to say yes thank you, or no I'm fine. The instinct is the trap. I curled my fingers into my palms until my nails hurt. Ignore it, I told myself. Do not move, do not engage. The air felt tighter, as if the stall had shrunk around me. The chain made a tiny metallic note, still swinging its last arc. "Red," the voice said, as if offering. Or blue. The words were too close to be outside the door. They had the intimacy of whispers spoken inside a hood. They brushed my ear without moving the air. I tasted metal, like biting my tongue. A story I had read clicked into place in my head with awful precision. Red meant being cut until you were drenched in your own blood. Blue meant strangled or drained until your face turned the color of the sky before a storm. "Refuse," the article had said. "Do not play. Get up and go. If you ask for a different color, a trick, something clever, you are dragged to a place worse than death. Do not make it into a game. Walk away. Run. Live." I stood slowly, knees popping. My hands shook so much I had to use both to pull the latch. It moved, sticky with moisture, and for a heartbeat it felt like a hand on the other side pushed back. The latch released. The door opened inward a finger's width and then stopped, like somebody's shoe blocked it. "I do not need paper," I said, trying to keep my voice flat. "I am leaving." Silence. Then, almost amused, "Everyone needs something." The space under the door was only an inch high, but anything could be an eye if you believed in it enough. A shadow darkened that narrow strip, not a person's shadow, but the thicken and thin of fabric moving, something that brushed the tile, pooling as it settled. It looked red in my flashlight's white beam, a heavy red that made the world around it seem bleached. Behind the red, a pair of shoes came into view. Not the old loafers of a janitor, not sneakers, but glossy black, the kind a teacher might have worn when teachers dressed like totems of adulthood. I imagined the rest because the imagination was worse than seeing. The cloak, the mask, the sense of handsome features hidden not to deceive but to protect you from looking too long. I fought the urge to kneel and try to peer through the gap between door and frame. "Red," the voice murmured, "or blue." I took a breath. No. The faucet screamed as if a hand had wrenched it open. Water roared into the sink and then into an overflow that no longer existed. It gurgled, a wet throat clearing. The stall's water level rose, trembling almost to the brim. The chain swung of its own accord now, casting faint rings of shadow like ripples of wind. Something thumped in the next stall. Then another thump, closer, rhythmic like a heel. I felt the pressure tighten around my chest. Not quite a touch. My flashlight flickered. In that flicker, the thin gap around the door went black and then red again, like a slow blink. The voice came from every direction at once, no longer kind. "Choose." I thought of the article's last line. "If you cannot refuse, run. If you cannot run, do not speak." I shoved the door. It did not budge. The red weight against it felt not like cloth, but like water with mass. The chain kissed the tile. The toilet water slopped and wet my shoe. I did not speak. I jammed my shoulder into the door, harder. The door moved the way a dream moves when you run, too slow, as if through syrup. The red slid with me, pressing. The glossy shoes pivoted, angling for leverage. I threw my entire body into the push, hands skidding on the rough paint. My breath broke into the high, humiliating wheeze of panic. Last inch. Last half inch. Then, in the mirror beyond the stall gap, at the angle where lights should have glared and died, I saw a face that was not under any mask, my own, ghosted in a rectangle of glass spotted with age, and behind it a second face where there was no head, shaped only by the red pooling into shoulders. The second face had the suggestion of features, as if someone had pressed fingers into clay and left them there. And where a mouth would be, I saw darkness as deep as the drain in the floor. I could not help it. "No paper," I gasped. "No cloak, no color, nothing." The pressure eased as if some law had been satisfied. The red receded like blood under water. The shoes turned, heel clicking once, and then were gone. The sound of the faucet dialed itself down. The toilet settled, water sloshing gently. I stood with my palm on the door, shaking harder than I had after any real danger I could name. Car accidents, a sudden illness in the middle of the night, the phone call that changes a life in a single hello. I stepped out. The bathroom was empty, drained of everything but the smell of iron and the faintest whisper of a cold draft. In the corner of the sink lay a single folded square of paper, too perfect to be torn from the school's coarse rolls. It was crisp, heavy, white. Of course it was white. I did not touch it. I backed out of the bathroom and closed the door with the same care you'd use to put a sleeping child into bed. I walked the corridor. The rain had softened to a hiss. The monitors showed only the boring geometry of a building at rest. At the desk, I wrote the incident report that we were required to keep, not in detail, not with legends and colors and voices, but with the blandest possible phrases: lights malfunctioning in women's bathroom, faucet stuck open for 1 minute, then resolved, investigated unusual sounds, nothing found. I placed the report on the stack with the others. My hands looked normal again. And yet, every hour I did another round. Every hour I avoided the north corridor until the last possible minute. When I checked that bathroom again, the white paper was gone. In its place, the out-of-order tape had been smoothed flat, its adhesive line crisp, as if it had never been peeled up at all. Near 3 in the morning, the building settled with a groan that resonated up my spine in a way I could feel in my molars. On the desk, my phone lit with a notification. A message from an unknown number with no content. Just a red square and a blue square in the preview, the kind used for tagging images. I deleted it. When it came again, I turned my phone off and put it face down. At 4, the power hiccuped and the monitors went black for long seconds. In that temporary, unnatural quiet, I heard something like the thrum of a voice spoken through water. It came from the vents, or the pipes, or the space inside the walls where now and then a rat might run. I told myself the hum was the building. I told myself I had refused. I had survived. That is what the story promised. If you ignore, if you reject both, you live. You walk out, you go on. I made it to morning. Students arrived in the spill of gray light. They rolled their eyes at the weather, stamped their shoes on the mats, laughed in that wrecking ball way kids laugh when their heads are too full of being alive. The day teacher slid past me with an apology about the storm and a thermos that smelled like lemon and ginger. The building became the building again. All its nighttime secrets folded away under fluorescent hum and the warm hurt of day. I went home. I slept. I told myself not to tell anyone because speaking it would make it solid. For 2 nights I did not take the shift. The 3rd night I needed the money, and I said yes. The building seemed ordinary, almost friendly in its way of becoming what people decided it was. Only then did the twist reveal itself. Not in the bathroom, not in the corridor, but in a convenience store down the street. I had ducked in for a bottle of water and a triangle of rice. The restroom sat in the back by the stacked crates of soda, its door warped by humidity. I stood in line behind a girl with a music school backpack and a man who wore a jacket too heavy for the weather. Somewhere behind the door, the toilet flushed. The girl shifted from foot to foot and the man sighed, bored. And I heard myself say it before I knew I was speaking. I heard the cadence, gentle, considerate, like someone offering a hand to help you off a bus. Do you need paper? The girl glanced back, surprised. The man's eyes slid from the crooked sign to my face and away, polite. The line moved forward. The restroom door opened. A woman came out fixing her hair. The girl went in. I stared at my hands, the lines in my palms, the normalcy of them. When the door closed and the latch clicked, my mouth shaped the next words, soft enough that only the door could hear. Red, I whispered, or blue. The sink sputtered alive on the other side of the wall. The line behind me shifted, a cough, the shiver of a plastic bag. I waited, pulse loud in my ears, not exactly afraid. Not exactly anything. When the girl came out, she was pale, but she smiled a little, the way people smile when they feel silly for being spooked by their own reflection. She moved past me with a nod. The man went in. I did not speak this time. The urge had passed in the smallest of ebbs, leaving behind that metallic taste I now knew too well. Outside, rain stitched the air back together. I found myself looking at any door with a little sign, at any corridor that ended in tile and a mirror. My phone, even on silent, pulsed twice with messages that had no content at all. Just color. I go on. I refuse. When I remember to refuse, I do not play. But sometimes a choice is not a question. Sometimes it is the shape of your mouth when an old story borrows your voice. Once, back at the cram school, in that same bathroom with the out-of-order tape, I saw a folded square of white again on the sink. I left it alone, as if it were a landmine. When I returned later, it had unfurled on its own, a perfect blank. If there is a resolution, it is only this. I learned the rules, and I lived, and the cost of living is to carry the echo. Somewhere under the corridors, under the tiles and the pipes and the history, something waits. A red fold of shadow that pools when you stare too long, a blue hold on your breath when you forget to breathe. It does not need your belief. It has the patience of gravity. I refuse when I can, and when I cannot, I become the question and say the words that make the world pause. Do you need paper?